Greetings, fellow travelers, vagrants, explorers, wildlanders, and welcome to episode 54 of the Retro Wildlands. My name is Nomad, and this is my gaming podcast, where I like to share my thoughts and experiences with a video game that I have discovered or rediscovered while roaming the gaming wildlands. Thank you very much for tuning into the show today. Whether this is your 54th episode, your very first, or you're somewhere in between, I am very glad to have you with us as we prepare our expedition for another journey into the wildlands. Dee Dee, our canine expedition leader, has been working hard combing through our resources and making sure the expedition is well organized. We never know what sort of adventures we're going to get ourselves into, so we make it a point to stock up on some weaponry if things ever get hairy. In the name of efficiency and creativity, he's been combining a few things and the effects have been, well, rather interesting. Like when he combined the fire weapon that we have with this homing weapon that we have. Nothing strikes fear into our enemies like a weapon that shoots guided fireballs. Still, don't know how Dee Dee does half the things he does without any thumbs, but I guess that's why he's leading this outfit, not me. And while the idea of combining things can seem a little gimmicky depending on the context, I assure you that on this trip, skillful use of our resources is going to make the difference. Not only when it comes to our survivability, but our overall enjoyment as well. What does that even mean? Well, I've got a great game to share with you, my friends. On today's episode, we're checking out a video game that was pitched to me as a run-and-gun shooter very similar to Contra. I'd like to think a decent amount of you listening probably know Contra on the original Nintendo. Classic NES tough shooter that is tough as nails, fun as hell, and very near and dear to my heart. It was even covered on one of the earlier episodes of the Retro Wildlands too. But when I was told about a game on the Sega Genesis that was comparable and arguably more fun, it immediately caught my attention. While there were only 4 weapons in the game that your character could pick up, the hook was that you could combine the 2 that you could pick up and create a powerful, unique super weapon. All the while, enemies are pouring in on screen, doing everything that they can to stop you. The best part? The gameplay experience and the visual presentation were smooth as butter. I started to wonder how I've not heard of this game before, and I was surprised to find out that a decent amount of people in my personal circle of gaming friends hadn't heard of this game either. So with that, I knew what I had to do. I needed to check this game out, and without spoiling my thoughts on the entire episode coming up, I walked away from the experience with one singular thought. Where the hell has this game been all of my life? Today, on the Retro Wildlands, we are checking out Gunstar Heroes. I'm sure I mentioned this on one of our past episodes, but shooters in general are one of my favorite gaming genres. And that's kind of all-encompassing too. I'm talking first-person shooters, side-scrolling shooters, shoot-em-ups, or shmups as the kids like to call them. There's just something therapeutic about taking out waves of enemies with high-powered weaponry. So a game like Gunstar Heroes seemed like a no-brainer. But once I decided to tackle this game and really get into it, I kept finding little things that just added to the overall experience in ways that I was not expecting a 30-year-old video game to do. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think this game is a perfect 10 out of 10 experience, but I would have given almost anything to have had this game in my collection as a kid. While the biggest gameplay mechanic is your ability to combine weapons into something unique, you were surprisingly mobile in Gunstar Heroes. You could jump, hang from ledges, attack enemies with physical jump attacks, and even throw enemies into each other. Plus, there's the couch co-op element where you could play with a friend, a sibling, or a kick-ass parent. There's certainly a lot here, and while the game's difficulty can get a little out of hand at times, that doesn't take away from the overall experience. I played this game a bit on my Nintendo Switch using the Nintendo Online expansion pack subscription where I could play Genesis games, but I will admit I also sailed the high seas a bit while playing this one. Yarr. It was easy to get lost in a play session, and I found myself itching to go back anytime I was not playing this game. I am very eager to take you all through this game so that those of you who have no idea what this game is know what you're getting into, and those of you who have played this game before can sit back and bathe in the sweet, sweet nostalgia. Now, if you're new to the show, I like to kick things off by chatting it up with you all a little bit first and give everyone a peek behind the scenes here in the Retro Wildlands. Depending on what's on my mind, I like to share what's going on with the show itself, what games I might be playing, what projects I might be planning, what's going on in my personal life, or whatever I feel like vomiting into the microphone. I also want to take some time and read and respond to any comments that we received about Gunstar Heroes from our Retro Wildlands social media pages in an effort to give the community a moment in the spotlight. Now, if none of that sounds interesting to you and you're here just for my thoughts on Gunstar Heroes, no worries, you can skip ahead about 10 to 12 minutes and you should get into the game talk. I'll also put timestamps in the show notes so you can see exactly where you need to go if you don't want to stick around. But I think you should stick around. We're going to talk a bit of video games, and your fellow Wildlanders will get a chance to sound off their thoughts to the rest of us. And I can't think of a better way to get our expedition moving. So, without further ado, let's get into our opening segment that I like to call Campfire Catchup. One of the things that I absolutely love about being a gamer in the year 2024 is that there are a ton of video games to play and experiences to be had. Conversely, one of the things that I absolutely hate about being a gamer in 2024 is that there are a ton of video games to play and experiences to be had. While I am not at all opposed to purchasing my video games digitally, I have amassed quite a collection of physical media over the last few years, and physical is my preferred way to play if I can help it. At the time I'm speaking these words, I currently own 581 unique physical video games. While I can't help but look at my growing collection with pride, and I love how it just gives me the warm and fuzzies, I'm no fool. Unless I cut out a ton of things in my life, I'm not going to be able to play them all. It's a little daunting and a little bit disheartening when I actually sit and think about it. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks this way, right? The work that I do at my day job requires above average time management skills, and I have to find ways to be as efficient with my time as possible, and I often find that bleeding over into my personal life at times. I'm constantly looking at where I'm spending my time and trying to find ways to fit more into my day. It can be a real stressor, so you know what? I'm doing my best not to think like that and really concentrate on all the things that I've done and accomplished lately. See, you probably thought I was going to go all negative on you, but nay. Life is stress, and there's absolutely things that we won't be able to get to, but that shouldn't discount the awesome adventures that we've already had. So while I've had a ton of games that I want to play, I've played a ton already and completed a decent amount too. I was thinking about it the other day, and one of the things that I'm happiest with in regards to this podcast is the fact that it's making me play games that I wouldn't have otherwise. Take Gunstar Heroes, for example. But more than that, even if I don't have immediate plans to cover them for the podcast, I'm trying to play games that I've always wanted to, but just never got around to for one reason or another. Final Fantasy IX is a great example. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this on the last episode, but I finally decided to play this game after missing out on it on the original PlayStation. I'm still not sure if I feel confident enough that I can do the game justice on a podcast episode, but I'm really putting in some time with this one, finally, and I've been impressed with the whole experience so far. Without spoiling anything, I think I'm in the back half of the game. Things seem to be ramping up, and I just finished up Ibsen's Castle. The only thing about this game is I wish I could dedicate more time to it. I've been using a guide on and off, and I cringe when I realize I missed out on something or failed to see a cool cutscene because I was too quick to move on. Still, I'm having a blast, and I'm so glad I finally decided to jump into this. I just need to make sure that I stick the landing and I don't get distracted by something shiny like I did when I was playing through Final Fantasy VI this last summer. Now, I know I just got done basically saying you should jump into the games that you've been putting off so you don't regret not playing them, but allow me to counter that bit of uplifting advice by saying this. Lately, I've been getting a massive itch to go back to some of my favorite games in the Metal Gear franchise. My three favorites are Portable Ops and Peace Walker on the PlayStation Portable, and Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain on the PlayStation 3 and 4. I've played the crap out of all three of these games, and I almost feel a little bit guilty about wanting to go back to them. But another part about how we should be living this awesome life that we've been given is that we should make sure that we're doing the things that make us happy. And damn it, kidnapping enemy soldiers to build my own private army makes me happy. I ended up getting the Phantom Pain for my PS3 since I played the snot out of it on my PS4, and I'm slowly working through that game again whenever I get the urge to just settle down with a comfort food game. But oddly enough, I was approached by a podcast host who wanted to see if I was interested in doing a show all about the Phantom Pain. I know, it was like fate was telling me that I needed to replay this game, and that conversation was my confirmation. If this collaboration happens, it probably won't be for a long while, as that host is playing through some of the other Metal Gear games first. But all that to say, I hope you find time to play the games that you've been putting off, but also don't discount the ones that make you happy. You never quite know where either road is going to lead you. And if things do pan out with this other podcast, I'll absolutely let everyone know if they want to partake in checking that episode out. What's the best way to stay informed, you might be wondering? Easy. You can check us out on our social media pages. We have a presence over on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, Threads, and Blue Sky pages if you want to check us out and throw us a follow. Or you can go to our link tree at linktr.ee/RetroWildlands to see all these pages in one place. I mostly just post pictures of my game collection and other gaming-related stuff, but I'll occasionally sprinkle in things about the show itself, so if you're looking for updates on new episodes I'm planning, any guest appearances I may partake in, or you just want to add a little retro spice to your timelines and feeds, feel free to toss us a follow. It's 100% free, and you should do it because you have good taste in content. How can I tell? Trust me. If you've listened to me ramble this far, you absolutely do. Other than that, the only thing I wanted to mention is that convention season here in Ohio is more or less underway, and I'm going to try my best to hit up a few more gaming conventions here in Ohio this year. The first one is coming up on Saturday, June 1st. I'll be at Korg's, which is the Columbus, Ohio Retro Gaming Society Convention. It'll have the usual fare, tons of vendors, arcade games set up throughout, and some special guests around the industry, as well as some content creators that I've been following for a while. It'll be the very first time that I've gone to this particular convention, so I am really looking forward to this one. There's also the Cleveland Gaming Classic coming up in September that I had a good time at last year, as well as the Torg Gaming Convention in November of this year. Needless to say, I am looking forward to the remainder of the year, and if you happen to be at Korg's coming up in June, or any of the other conventions I just mentioned, certainly keep an eye out if you happen to be there. My wife and I will be there together wearing a couple black Retro Wildlands hoodies. That'll for sure happen at Korg's coming up, but after seeing all the amazing cosplays that have happened at these conventions over the years, I think I finally decided that I want to partake in the cosplay fun. I haven't 100% committed to anything yet, but I do have a character in mind that I think I want to cosplay as. Am I going to tell you which one? Yeah, maybe not right now. Maybe later though. Maybe on social media, where you should follow us, wink wink. Anyway, I think that's all I really want to ramble about. It is time to transition into the reason that you're all here today. It's time to start talking about Gunstar Heroes. We had one Wildlander drop a comment on our social media about Gunstar Heroes, so before we get into the meat of the episode, I wanted to give them their moment in the spotlight. Nicholas over on our Facebook page said, "Sweet! I love tankless Metal Slug." You know, I didn't really think about it, but Gunstar Heroes really is a lot like Metal Slug. Or at least they share the same DNA. One of the first things that I put in my notes when I was preparing the script for this episode was that Gunstar just had this arcade feel that brought me right back to my childhood. The action in this game is very quick, it's unrelenting, and visually smooth. There's also a point where, when your vitality is low enough, the top part of the screen will blink red, and that to me just screamed arcade. Anytime I see a Metal Slug game in an arcade or a bar, I will always give that game a go. The action is just so fast-paced, the bosses are just as crazy, and the weapon power-ups that you can grab really solidified that experience. I also love that in Gunstar Heroes, there's a shoot-'em-up stage, and while you're not really in a tank, riding the mine carts in the underground mine stage is a nice change of pace. Both of these franchises are great fun in that sense, so I say, if you like Metal Slug in any capacity, you're probably going to enjoy Gunstar Heroes. Thank you very much for taking the time to share a comment, Nicholas. I very much appreciate it. Originally released on September 10th, 1993 for the Sega Genesis, Gunstar Heroes brought frantic, action-packed gameplay to the Genesis in a way that we had not seen before. While run-and-gun shooters were fairly common and popular depending on who you asked, this game took an established premise and improved upon it tenfold. With characters that were more maneuverable on screen and weapons that could be combined to create a unique gameplay experience, there was a lot on offer. Often compared to Contra, this game did much more when it came to the overall presentation and, dare I say, the gameplay. The fast and furious on-screen action was captivating, and looking at it today, I have to say that this little beast outperformed the Super Nintendo in all aspects. And while all this praise is certainly warranted, one major question still remains. Is Gunstar Heroes fun to play today? Or is all the graphical prowess and unique gameplay features all bark and no bite? Well, my friends, I say it is about time we dig in and find out. So let's gear up, Wildlanders. Grab your favorite weapon, make sure your vitality is topped off, and then grab another weapon, one you think will make the deadliest combination possible. There's a lot going on in Gunstar Heroes, and we're going to need to be on our toes. The enemies won't stop coming, and we risk being overwhelmed. But so long as we have our reflexes at the ready and our finger on the trigger, there won't be anything strong enough to stand in our way. Well, except some of the bosses in this game. We may need to look out for them. While gaming in general has always been a pretty big part of my life, I didn't realize how much I really missed out on until I took a step back as an adult and really thought about the games that I had played. I had an NES when I was living with my grandmother for a while, but the number of games I ultimately played was limited. Eventually, my mom and stepdad brought a Super Nintendo into the home, but again, we didn't have a pile of games and we didn't really rent games all that often. Eventually, we got a PlayStation, and once I stepped foot into the 5th generation of game consoles, I rarely looked back. The one console I really missed out on was the Sega Genesis, and even though I did get to play it here and there the weekends I would visit my dad, I only scratched the surface when it came to the Sega's library of games at the time. Now, while I didn't get much opportunity to play any Genesis games growing up, I still heard about a lot through my friends at school. Games like Toe Jam and Earl, Mortal Kombat, Streets of Rage, Earthworm Jim, but never did I hear about a game called Gunstar Heroes. When I did eventually hear the name a little after I started this podcast, I wasn't all that impressed with the name. Gunstar Heroes. I don't know why, but it sounded like a bargain bin name to me. Eventually, though, I heard more about this game, and as I watched more gaming videos online and listened to other retro gaming content, what Gunstar Heroes was started to take shape. Plus, many of the gamers I've gotten to know through the podcast are quick to bring up Gunstar Heroes as either one of their favorite Genesis games or a game they openly recognize as one of the console's top-tier offerings. But as soon as someone described it to me as Contra on crack, I immediately put this game on the short list of retro games that I wanted to experience. One of my earliest gaming memories was with Contra on the original Nintendo. I remember not being able to play it often, but the experience stuck with me long after nonetheless. There was just something about the whole concept that sunk its teeth into me. The way you move your character around, using your inhuman jumping ability to dodge around enemy fire, and how you shot your enemies dead while pushing forward through the level. Most of all, I loved the different power-ups that you could grab that could change up your experience and give you more ways to defeat your foes. Power-ups like the machine gun, laser, and the all-powerful spread gun. If you never found enjoyment destroying wave after wave of enemies with the spread gun, I may never understand you, but either way, all of that stuck with me and even translated into my current gaming taste today. So all that said, that made Gunstar Heroes that much more appealing. I kept hearing about how the run and gun mechanics were smooth as silk and the power-ups were on another level. Not only could you carry 2 unique weapons at once and switch between the 2 of them on the fly, you could combine them together and create a unique power-up that way. Got a flamethrower power-up and a homing power-up? Combine those and create a homing flamethrower. Certainly sounds basic by today's standards, but if I knew this game existed as a kid, that mechanic alone would have gotten my attention, and it certainly got my attention today. So now that I've played through Gunstar Heroes a few times, what are my thoughts? Well, I assume if you've listened this far, you're curious at the very least. I was hoping this game would be as fun as people made it out to be, and I was curious if this was a game that stood the test of time. Overall, I really like this game, but like I mentioned in the intro to the show, this game is not a 10 out of 10 for me. Now, in order to understand why that is, we need to get hands-on with this game. Let's start peeling back the layers and seeing exactly what it is that we're working with. So, what is this game? Gunstar Heroes is a run-and-gun style shooter where players take control of one of 2 Gunstar Heroes. Red if you're player 1, and blue if you're player 2. The Gunstar twins are on a mission to stop an evil empire from realizing their evil plans, and whether or not they succeed is going to be up to you. This game contains 7 stages all told, however the first 4 stages can be tackled in any order. Once complete, the game's next 3 stages are tackled in order. Each stage has a unique look and feel to them, but what sets each stage apart are the dozens of unique minor and major boss battles throughout. I will put my cards on the table here, folks. The bosses in this game are downright amazing in both how they look and how they function. But we'll get a little bit more into the bosses later. Now, Gunstar Heroes can be played alone, or you can team up with a friend. I wasn't able to try this game out with a pal, but I'm sure the experience would have been even better with a buddy at your side. Your goal for each stage is ultimately the same. Blast past the bad guys, make it to the end of the level, defeat the big bad, and move on. Simple premise to be sure, but there's one very important thing that we're going to find out as we move through this game. It is hard. It can be exceptionally hard. It was hard for me, and I like to think that I am a slightly above average gamer, too. Gunstar Heroes will test you, but I can guarantee it is a test that you'll be willing to take. So that said, I think it's time we slot this game into our Sega Genesis and get this show on the road. The best way to learn is by doing, and once we do get going, you'll see that this is a game that you just need to dive into headfirst. So let's hit the power button and get going. When we get started, we see the iconic Sega logo on screen. There's no sound on screen, but anytime I see that Sega logo, I always hear that classic intro in my head. Sega! Next, we see the logo for the game's developer, Treasure. I didn't really know who Treasure was until I took a moment to look into them while writing this script. Once I realized who they were, I practically slapped myself on the forehead. Treasure is a Japanese game developer that came to be in 1992 and was primarily made up of former employees from Konami. Their goal was to work on original properties and concepts because they had felt a bit hamstrung under Konami's business model at the time, which seemed to be focused on creating sequels to existing games and having little focus on anything new. Their first development project was a little game called McDonald's Treasure Land Adventure, but ultimately Gunstar Heroes saw the light of day first, making it their first developed and published game. But as time passed, Treasure would go on to develop a few dozen games, most notably Mischief Makers on the Nintendo 64, Alien Soldier on the Genesis, Wario World on the GameCube, and Gradius 5 on the PlayStation 2. I haven't played many of their games, but I am anxious to keep them on my radar. After the Treasure logo disappears from the screen, we're met with an opening movie that starts to explain the game's story. On screen, we can see 3 members of the Gunstar family running towards the right side of the screen. Gunstar Red is leading the charge on foot, followed by Gunstar Blue. Gunstar Green is keeping pace aboard a mechanical platform of sorts that we'll later learn is called 7 Force, a machine that can transform into, you guessed it, 7 unique forms. If you're anything like me, you'll slowly develop a hatred for that machine, but I am getting ahead of myself. According to the text at the bottom of the screen, one of the brothers shouts, "We have to stop him!" Soon our heroes stop in front of a large green mechanical-looking tower. The screen scrolls upwards, sort of like the opening for Mega Man 2. Once we reach the top, we see a tall man clad in red. This man is known as Colonel Red, and he looks a hell of a lot like M. Bison from Street Fighter 2. Not M. Bison looks down on our heroes and says, "Your journey ends here." Pfft, this guy is becoming lame right out of the gate. I already can't take this guy seriously. Can't wait until we can pump him full of lead. Anyway, on the next screen, our heroes spy a glow in the sky. Pointing to it, one of them says,
"Where is he? That light, it's too late."
Finally, on the last screen, we're shown a female Gunstar known as Gunstar Yellow. She's also watching the shiny, glowy thing in the sky, but seems deeply concerned.
"No, the Earth, under one person's power."
Soon the light makes landfall and the screen fades to white. After watching this for the very first time, I remember thinking to myself, what the hell is going on with this story? Now, I know the storylines of older retro games aren't normally that complicated, but for some reason, I remember thinking when I first played this game that I really wanted to know what the hell was going on here. Soon the game's title screen appears, and on screen we see the words Gunstar Heroes spin into place. We can press start to get things underway, or wait a little longer for an additional story setup scene to pop up, but I really want to know what this game's story is all about now. Where could we get a little bit more story setup? Ah, I know just where to go. The game's instruction manual. I know I've said it a bunch of times in the past, but man, I miss instruction manuals in games. And I'm talking about legitimate instruction manuals. The thick ones that include the game's story, character information, tips and tricks. The kind that I used to take with me to read when I wasn't at home. Damn, I miss those. Anyway, let's crack open the Gunstar Heroes manual and check for a story summary that'll satisfy my curiosity. Let's see here. Ah, perfect. Let's see what we got.
Sometime in the future, somewhere not too far from where you live, an amazing adventure takes place. The Gunstar family has been the protector of the planet Gunstar 9 for generations. Professor White Gunstar, in his youth, defeated the robot Golden Silver, a machine that traveled millions of miles to suck Gunstar 9 dry of all its resources. Professor White was able to extract the 4 famous mystical gems, the robot's power source, and imprisoned the robot in one of Gunstar 9's moons. But now, years later, a new menace has arisen. Colonel Red, a vicious dictator
And a bad dresser, ha ha ha.
found out that the Gunstars knew the location of the mystical gems. One day, the Colonel kidnapped the Gunstar twins' older brother Green and used a mind control machine to make Green obey his orders. With Green's help, Colonel Red has amassed all 4 mystical gems, has turned Gunstar 9's peaceful worker droids into deadly menaces, and is now preparing to leave for Gunstar 9's moon to reactivate Gold and Silver. As one of the Gunstar twins, you must fight your way past Colonel Red's Empire army and retrieve the mystical gems, or Gold and Silver, the Destructor, will rise again and destroy the world. Are you heroic enough for the task?
Okay, so that was a pretty standard story setup, but I think I can appreciate what it is that we're trying to do here a little bit more. Knockoff M. Bison needs to be stopped, and while Gold and Silver sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon villain, we'll make sure he sees the bottom of a trash bin, count on that. Anywho, let's turn our attention back to the game's title screen and press on, shall we? Once we're back on the title screen, we need to press start. From here, we have a couple options. We can jump right into the game by selecting 1 or 2 players, or we can explore the options menu. Let's head on over to the options menu really quick. Basic options are on offer here. You can change up the game's control scheme a bit, and the always popular sound test is available if you want to listen to the game's music or sound effects. But what I think you should take a look at more than anything is the game's difficulty setting. You can play Gunstar Heroes on normal difficulty, but there's also a hard mode and an expert mode. Now, I always play my games on the normal difficulty to start whenever I'm starting out, and I have to say, normal mode does not mess around in this game. I found myself dying pretty often on the game's normal setting. Thankfully though, there is an easy setting, and once I played on easy mode, I was having a much better experience. I'm not entirely sure what changes specifically when you alter the difficulty, but I feel like the biggest thing I noticed when I turned it down was that enemies weren't shooting as many projectiles at me, and taking hits didn't really reduce my health as much. I did read that some boss characters physically change, and they may even have different attacks depending on the difficulty, which is kinda cool in the grand scheme of things. Now, you all know me, I do not judge a gamer by their choice of difficulty, but I think you should try normal mode first, and then dial it back if you need to if the difficulty is a bit too much. After my first playthrough on easy, I was much more comfortable with the game, its controls, and how all the cool weapons worked, that my next playthrough on normal wasn't nearly as bad. Still a beefy challenge though. For our purposes here today though, we'll leave the difficulty on normal and drive right into the experience that the developers intended. When we're back on the main menu, all that's left to do is jump headfirst into our adventure. Before we embark, we're going to have to make a few important decisions, so let's get to it. Go ahead and select one player and press start. Alright, first up, we need to choose how our Gunstar Hero is going to behave when firing their weapon. On screen, you're given the option between free shot and fixed shot. Free shot means you can run and shoot at the same time. Anytime you shoot and aim your weapon around, you're going to be mobile. This is your classic run and gun style and a pretty solid choice. Fixed shot means that your character will stand still when you discharge your weapon. Selecting fixed shot will allow you to point your weapon a little bit more precisely than you can if you're in the free shot mode. There's pros and cons to each selection here, and it's really going to come down to your playstyle and preference. Personally, I prefer the free shot, so let's select that. Next, we need to select what weapon we want to take with us. Now, here is the bread and butter of Gunstar Heroes gameplay, the weaponry. You have 4 weapons to choose from, and only a single sentence description to decide what might work best for you. First up, we have Force. The symbol is 3 arrows, and this weapon shoots a beam of plasma energy. Now, while the game says this weapon is a lot like the machine gun in Contra. You're not shooting a solid beam, more like lots and lots of little balls, so quick that it looks like a solid beam. Overall, Force is a solid choice. Next, we have Lightning, which has the symbol of a lightning bolt. This weapon fires a stream of electricity. When I first read that, I assumed it was like a lightning gun where the beam would be all erratic or something similar. But really, the lightning weapon more or less shoots laser beams. The beam isn't solid, but I would say each individual beam is about half the height of your character, if that puts it in perspective. The best part about the beam is that it goes through enemies and damages others, so that is pretty handy. Our next choice for a weapon is the Chaser. Symbolized by a single green arrow facing upwards, this weapon fires little laser darts that seek out the enemy. Basically, it's your standard issue homing weapon. It's very easy to assume that this is the best weapon, but you have to keep in mind that the Chaser is the weakest weapon strength-wise. Or at least that was my observation. A great weapon if you need to keep moving and you're constantly finding yourself evading attacks. Lastly, we have the Fire Weapon. This bad boy is basically a flamethrower weapon. The range is limited, but I feel as though fire is the strongest from a damage output standpoint. Now, don't think too much about what weapon you want to use. We'll have plenty of opportunities to pick up new weapons as we go. When I played Gunstar Heroes for the very first time, I chose the Force weapon, so let's start with that as well. Alright, one more choice to make. We need to decide what stage we want to jump into. Like I mentioned before, we can tackle the first 4 stages in any order we want. First up on the left is the Ancient Ruins. In my opinion, this is the easiest of the 4 stages, and I think it is a great starting point. The next stage is the Underground Mine. This stage is unique in that we're going to be attached to a mining cart. This level scrolls exceptionally fast, and the bosses we have to face in the end are no joke. I usually make it a point to leave this level for last. The third stage that we can select is the Flying Battleship. I think this stage is the second easiest and has us jumping upwards in order to get onto a flying battleship before it takes off. Once we do get on the battleship, the level is pretty standard fare. Lastly, we have the Strange Fortress level. This stage is easily the most unique. It starts off unassuming enough, but the meat of our time spent here will be in the Dice Palace, which has us navigating across spaces on a game board. We need to throw a die which will tell us how many spaces we can move forward on the game board. And each space either forces us into a battle, provides us an opportunity to gear up with new weapons, or, if we're unlucky, we'll face a boss barehanded. Oh, and let's not forget, there's a space near the very end that, if you land on it, you're sent all the way back to the beginning of the board game level. I really like the novelty here, but this stage, I think, is the second hardest. You have the potential to fight a lot of enemies here, and you need to make your health last, as there are not a lot of opportunities to replenish it. So with all that said, I vote we start with the first stage and ease our way into the experience. So let's select that, and off we go. Alright, let's do this. On screen, we find ourselves in a lush green landscape. Large trees are in the background, and the sky above is a beautiful blue. Our Gunstar Hero stands ready just as a little, I don't know what it is, a little green human runs past us. Looks like he's running from danger, but don't worry, little guy or gal, support has arrived. Now, before we engage the enemy, let's quickly run through what's on screen. At the top of the screen, we can see a few things. First, we have our vitality, which starts off at 100. The nice thing about this game is that getting hit doesn't mean you lose a life automatically. You'll take damage over time, however, once your vitality reaches 0, you're done, and the game is over. Yes, you absolutely heard me right. This game does not have any lives, and once you die, you are done. Now, if you happen to be playing with a friend, you can come back into the fight by taking some of their vitality, but by and large, the one thing you want to make sure you don't do is take a bunch of hits. The level's bosses are going to be blasting you enough, and you want to make sure that you get to them in semi-decent shape. I will say, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that this game features unlimited continues, and there are some checkpoints in the levels, so you don't have to play them completely over from scratch, but let's just not make it a point to die if we can help it, alright? Now, above your vitality is your overall score. Other than bragging rights, I don't think the score factors in anywhere, so if you want to see how high of a score you can get, feel free. I think you'll be more focused on survival, but that's just me. Now, lastly, we'll see 2 circles next to our score and vitality. This is a visual representation of the weapons that we have in our possession. Since we only have the one, we can see the symbol for force up there. Once we get another weapon, things are going to get pretty wild, but we'll get there soon enough. Okay, that is enough of that. It is time to get moving. Pressing right on the directional pad will get us moving in that direction. Almost immediately, we come across our first threats. There's a sort of tree hut on top of a platform that's being attacked by several now evil worker droids. A little green guy or gal runs scared as their home is demolished. Well, we can't stand for that now, can we? If Colonel Red and his minions wanted a war, well, they have one now. Pressing the B button on the Genesis controller will fire your weapon. Now, the nice thing about weapons in this game is that they're all automatic, so really we just need to hold down the button for continuous fire. We can aim our weapon all around us with the directional pad. To take these guys out, fire your weapon and hold the directional pad up and a little bit to the right. There you go, nothing to it. Just be careful we don't accidentally destroy that little human's home. Whoops. I'm sure it's fine. He probably has a relative that he can go crash with. I'm sorry, what was that? His family was brutally murdered? Oh. Anyway, let's keep moving. We can't change the past, am I right? Actually, before we move on, before all hell breaks loose, let's practice jumping using the ledge that held that little human's home. What sets Gunstar Heroes apart is how nimble and mobile your character can get. Jumping is pretty standard with the C button, but if you jump underneath the ledge and hold up on your directional pad, your Gunstar Hero will hold on to it. Here's where it gets kinda cool. While hanging, you can still fire your weapon all around you. This is a fantastic technique if you need to get off the ground and give yourself some breathing room. You can even shimmy to the left or to the right. At any point, you can either drop back down to the ground, or if there's space above you, you can pull yourself up to the ledge above. You'll be needing to do things like this quite a bit to not only traverse some of the stages, but also to stay alive, so take a moment to get used to this mechanic now. No, I'm serious. Practice right now. It's okay, I'll wait. Alright, that's plenty. Let's move on. As soon as we inch forward, it's as if the floodgates open. We immediately have several droids coming at us from the front and from the back, but there are also airborne enemies coming in as well. These little red pods floating in on small little propeller blades. Holy shit, guess we're going to have to learn to use some of the other moves this game has to offer on the fly. So whatever you do, just keep shooting and keep listening. We will get through this, hero. Okay, if you're on top of the ledge, let's make a superhero jump down. We can actually fire our weapon airborne, and we can control the direction it fires too. So as soon as you take to the air, start lighting some of these bad boys up. Nice, that's the way to do it. Now be careful, the little red pods are going to be dropping bombs while the enemy droids are going to be shooting lasers at you. The nice thing about this game is that touching an enemy does not damage you, so don't be afraid to get close if need be. Just be warned that you'll have next to no time to dodge an attack if they choose to fire one off. Also, the worker droids have the ability to grab you and hold you in place, and in a game as hectic as this, there is no faster way to get hurt than by standing still. Keep pressing your offense and clear out as many enemies as you can. They are starting to swarm us, hero. If an enemy does get too close to us, one of the cooler things we can do is grab and toss them. Yes, one of the nice things about combat in this game is that we have some options that don't involve relying solely on our weapons, so let's get used to some of these now. To toss an enemy, all we need to do is be near them and then press the B button and your character will grab them and toss them like a sack of potatoes. If you're feeling confident, you can even do this to some of the bombs that are falling towards you as well and chuck them back at the enemy. For now though, let's practice throwing by trying it out on the enemy coming up to us now. Ooh, nice. Did you see that? You can throw enemies into other enemies and help clear out the bad guys that way. While I didn't personally toss enemies around too much, it is an extremely helpful maneuver if you find yourself overwhelmed and your bullets aren't doing the job fast enough. As far as other unarmed techniques at your disposal, we have a couple more that we can learn while we have the enemies around us to learn on. First, we can attack unarmed in the air by performing a body slam. If we jump in the air and press the jump button again, our character will flatten themselves out. Any enemies we touch will take damage, and generally the lesser enemies we encounter will be killed outright. On tougher enemies, our body slam does a decent amount of damage if we connect. Most of the time I would find myself just saving this maneuver until we face some of the bigger bosses that we'll encounter later, but don't count this move out. It is a great way to cut a swath through your enemies. There's also a drop kick maneuver that we can pull off in the air as well. First, we need to be airborne by pressing the jump button, but instead of just pressing the jump button again, hold down at the directional pad before you do, and your hero will extend their 16-bit boot and shove it down your enemy's throat. Hell yeah, it was super effective! Lastly, your hero has the ability to perform a slide. While you hold down on your directional pad to make your Gunstar Hero duck, press the jump button and you can make them slide across the ground a little ways. Not only is this a great evasive technique, you'll potentially do damage to anything that touches you during this animation. I found myself using the slide a lot now that I think about it. While there's going to be a ton of things going on all at once, eventually you'll get to the point where you enter that Contra flow state that I was talking about in our Contra episode. Things will go a little slower as you dial yourself in, and you can start to see where enemies are a little clearer, and then you'll be able to pick out any projectiles coming your way. Then you'll be able to decide how you want to evade those things while keeping your sights trained on the enemy and anticipating other enemies that are around you. It's kinda like when Neo figures out that he really is the one. So while you're absolutely going to be overwhelmed with everything happening when you first try and get your bearings in this game, stick with it. The sensory overload will dial itself back in time, I guarantee it. Until then, however, let's get some more kills under our belt and keep pushing forward. Eventually, we'll see something flying towards us that is clearly not an enemy. It almost has the shape of a duck with a beaked form on one end and a fatter body looking thing on the other. It's kinda hard to describe, but you'll know it when you see it. This little guy is basically a capsule that holds an item, and if you do see one, you'll want to do what you can to shoot it and see what it has to offer you. So speaking of, don't let me waste time talking about it. Shoot that thing open and let's see what we got. On the ground drops an item that has a symbol on it, a blue lightning bolt. This right here is the lightning weapon, one of the weapons that we had a chance to take with us when we first started the game up. This is going to give us a fantastic boost to our offense, so we should grab it. Run over to it, press down, and then press your B button. Perfect. We can see the lightning bolt symbol up near our stats. As soon as we pick up a secondary weapon, the game will equip both the weapons that we have in our possession, and we will be given a powered-up version of both weapons combined. Now, this right here is Gunstar Heroes Meat and Potatoes. While there are only 4 base weapons in this game, it's combining 2 of them and creating something truly special. Pressing the A button allows you to switch to just your force gun or just your lightning gun if you wanted, but generally it's the combination that'll serve you best. In the case of our lightning gun, on its own it shoots lasers at a pretty okay rate. But combined with our force gun, and the lightning comes spewing out far and fast, and this baby may as well be a solid laser that we can whip around. Oh baby. Let's give this puppy a spin, shall we? We've got enemies closing in from all directions, and I don't know about you, but I think we could use a little breathing room. Yes, that is exactly what we needed. Whew, man, they just keep coming, don't they? Which brings me to another point I wanted to make. Just like in Contra, enemies will continue to spawn and attack you if you stand still, so while you can give yourself a little breathing room by making a stand like this, you need to remember that your objective is to keep moving. Now, scattered throughout some of the stages will be mini-bosses that we'll need to put down in order to progress. Outside of the unique weapon mechanics, what makes Gunstar Heroes so unique is the number of bosses that we'll have to fight. But these bosses aren't just your cookie-cutter, larger versions of enemies that you've seen before. Each one is special in how it looks, acts, and tries to kill you. The first one you encounter here, though, is probably one of the weirdest. Whenever you get near a boss enemy, you're informed by some text on screen saying,
"Boss is approaching."
Under that, you usually get the name of the thing that you're about to fight, and even a list of moves that thing will deploy against you. Your first mini-boss is called the Papaya Dance, and, well, it's a tree-looking thing, but if I'm honest, kinda looks like a giant penis. I don't really know what else to say here. Regardless of what it looks like, we need to take it out. At the top of the screen, you'll see a number. That number represents the boss's vitality. All we need to do is use the classic shoot it until it dies approach to gameplay, and we'll be all set. Just be mindful of the miscellaneous bombs and other projectiles that are going to be coming your way from the tree penis thing. Now, as you fight bosses, you'll find that some weapon combinations can be more effective than others. That's not to say you'll need specific weapons in order to succeed, but as you play, you'll learn which ones you may want to have when the time comes. For the penis plant, your rapid-fire lightning will more than do the trick. See? Nothing to it. Now, as we move forward, we come to a pyramid-type structure that we have to climb up. While I don't have a lot of criticisms to level at Gunstar Heroes, I started to get annoyed by a few things right around this point, and some of those annoyances would persist throughout the rest of the game. For one, when you do need to jump around and do some semblance of platforming, I didn't feel as though it was very, precise. Sure, in this specific area, it seems pretty easy to see what it is that you need to do. Jump up to each block until you get to the top, but there are also parts of the pyramid that you can hang down on. It's not at all obvious where this could be done, and when I was jumping, I felt as though I couldn't be as precise with where I wanted to land, and I couldn't really quite tell where I could drop down and explore the area a little further. And sure, it didn't help that there were some flying enemies in this area constantly shooting at us, but in areas like this where platforming is needed in order to progress, this is where I tended to take the most hits by the enemy. Yeah, exactly like that. It is quite annoying. The other thing that can be tough is when you're shooting at tougher enemies that don't go down in one hit. Great examples are the flying enemies in this area that I just mentioned. Unless I'm completely missing the visual cues, I'm not seeing anything that indicates that I'm landing a hit on the enemy. They don't flinch, they don't blink, or do anything to suggest that they're being hit, or that the weapon that I'm using is even effective. While it's certainly not the worst thing, because if you're constantly holding down your fire button, the enemy is constantly being bombarded by your firepower, it is something that I noticed. I like to know what I'm doing is effective. Thankfully though, when you're fighting bosses, they do flash when you're dealing damage to them, and their vitality meter is constantly visible on screen, so you do know how effective you are being in the boss battles, so there is that. Now, really quick before we move on, I want to take a moment and acknowledge something that I've glossed over up until now. The visual presentation in Gunstar Heroes is fucking incredible. It's hard for me to really articulate this over an audio-only podcast, but I absolutely mean it. The character sprites and animations are silky smooth, and at one point I counted 13 enemies on screen all at once, not counting my character and all the lead that I was slinging around. Everything moves very fast and buttery smooth, and never once did I experience anything like slowdown, screen tearing, or flicker. It's kind of funny thinking about it out loud. The smoothness of this game was actually a little off-putting initially. I can't remember who said this to me, but someone told me their first experience with Gunstar Heroes was a quote-unquote assault on their senses, and it was very difficult to keep track of what was going on screen and just what was happening in general. Personally, I kept getting myself lost in the chaos, and I kept taking hit after hit before I finally figured out where I was and regained control of the situation. As I played through, though, it all seemed to clear up, and my eyes were able to dance all over the screen, and eventually I was able to keep up with it all. I have no idea what Treasure did when developing this game to make the graphics and animations so smooth and fast, but goddamn did this team put their heart and soul into this thing. Gunstar Heroes is the smoothest 16-bit game that I have ever played, and I'd venture to say it'll be the smoothest that I ever will play, period. Now, speaking of the amazing graphical presentation, at the top of the pyramid is one of my favorite mini-bosses from a presentation standpoint. When we get to the top, we're given the
boss is approaching
warning text. Bravo Man flies on screen, and all Bravo Man is just a bunch of square blocks that take humanoid form. That sounds exceptionally boring, but the way this creature looks is awesome. The squares are obviously 2D, but the way this creature moves around, you would swear this thing was rendered in 3D. The way it walks, jumps, flies around, and tries to attack you is almost captivating. Bravo Man has over 3,000 vitality, if I remember right, which means he's going to take some serious punishment before he goes down. Keep your finger on the trigger, and when he gets too close, evade accordingly, whether that's jumping over him or sliding underneath. I actually found hand-to-hand techniques like the body slam and sliding actually did considerable damage to Bravo Man, but feel free to take this goon out however you see fit. Each stage in Gunstar Heroes is a unique experience and brings to the table much more than your standard run-and-gun shooter. Some stages are pretty standard like the one we just ran through a bit, but others are far more involved. Take, for instance, the underground mine level. In this level, your Gunstar Hero is positioned on top of a mine cart, and you will be blazing through this level at breakneck speeds. What's cool about this level is that jumping and then jumping again while in the air will have your minecart attach itself to the ceiling. Do it again and you'll return to the ground. This offers some interesting mobility options as enemies seem to constantly pour in on screen, and you've got to find even more creative ways to evade them. You'll even encounter trains that you'll need to take out by shooting the enemy occupants. It is a fantastic and unique level, and for a while, it was actually my favorite overall. I think the best part is when you encounter a train that has Not M. Bison on it. He attacks you by literally throwing his own troops at you. What a dick! It's funny to see and adds sort of a layer of charm to the overall experience. At one point, you'll actually descend downwards, and you'll have to bounce between the left side and the right side of the screen in order to avoid the enemy, all while you try to take them out. It's exceptionally well done, all things considered. The boss that you have to fight in this stage, I argue, is one of the hardest in the entire game, and that is the large transforming machine known as Seven Force. Seven Force is literally 7 bosses in one, and while it can be an incredible challenge to defeat all of its forms, what stands out for me more than anything is how incredible this boss looks. From the running animations it has in its soldier form, to the deadly grace of its eagle form, Seven Force is it's a force to be reckoned with. When I first played the game a couple times, I could not defeat this boss to save my life. It's very easy to take hits and lose your vitality, provided you had any vitality left after going through the level itself. Movements of each form are almost erratic, and while every boss essentially has a pattern that you can discern, I would constantly find myself getting trampled, stomped, or otherwise maimed. While the battle was frustrating at first, it was fun to slowly improve and get better as I went. I can't remember if I mentioned this before, pretty sure I did, but Gunstar Heroes has unlimited continues, so while it sucked being killed and sent back a ways, I could always get back to where I fell pretty easy. And more often than not, I was eager to keep fighting. At one point though, I stopped playing, and then when I came back to it, I threw down on the easiest difficulty, and I only had to defeat 3 of the 7 forms before the game let me move on, so that was kinda nice. Even though this particular boss kicked my ass, I couldn't help but respect it and the other bosses in this game. There's too many to mention, and I really think you should experience them yourself, but I can't finish up this episode without giving them the praise they deserve. Every single one of them is unique and requires you to think through how you fight them. There's the snake-like creature of Avalion, the 2-legged mech Pinky Rotor, the giant rock-looking monster called Curry and Rice, or the massive screen-dominating Super Gondola. Each encounter is unique, and as I continued to play through for the first time, I was genuinely excited when I met a boss because I wanted to see what the development team had thought up next. And to add to that, I was most excited to see if the weapon combination I had on me at the time would make quick work of the boss, or if I would have my work cut out for me. There is a lot I could talk about when it comes to Gunstar Heroes, but I don't think I can end the show without talking about the weapons. The whole idea that you can combine any of the 4 available weapons into something new is such a simple concept, but in execution, it works incredibly well. There are a lot of weapons and weapon systems across video games, but this system has quickly become one of my favorite. And it goes much more beyond the idea of just getting a new weapon. Now, math isn't my strong suit, but I count 14 unique weapons that you can have in this game, and that includes the base weapons without being combined with something. Some of them can sort of be similar, but you'll find yourself doing one of 2 things. You're either going to experiment with every combination to see what's out there, or you're quickly going to find what works best for you and you're going to try your best to stick with it. And really, either approach is okay. While some weapon combinations are more advantageous against certain bosses, every combination is useful. I personally enjoyed the fire weapon and combining it with another fire weapon to create the Ultra Flamethrower, giving the flame some excellent reach. It did a ton of damage if you could keep the flame on your target, and I found it made short work of a lot of the bosses too. When I couldn't get the flame where I needed it to go, I really enjoyed combining laser with a chaser weapon. The homing lightning would lock onto an enemy and just melt them like butter. It was incredible. Great for bosses with a tucked away weak point. Although the game didn't always lock on to the thing I wanted to kill, so it was hard to attack something specific unless I was physically right on top of it. But that is the trade-off for such amazing power. And since my running and gunning days started with Contra, I've always had a soft spot for the standard issue machine gun. So sometimes I would just use force and combine it with another force and create a machine gun style force of nature that mowed everything down. But of all the things I appreciate most about this weapon system, it's how it adds to the game's replayability. You're encouraged to try new things, and each weapon is unique enough that your way of playing the game can subtly change. You may find yourself getting into the thick of it with a close quarters weapon like fire, or you may prioritize movement and evasion while using a weaker weapon like the chaser. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to what weapons you use. It just comes down to your skill, adaptability, and ultimately how you want to experience this game. And I will always appreciate a video game that lets me play the game the way that I want it to, and not feel as though I'm being forced into the quote-unquote meta weapon build or something similar. Give me the tools and let me build the thing. And if it isn't something someone else likes to use, great! You do you, 'cause I am going to do me. As we start to wind it down, I have to say, I could probably go on and on about Gunstar Heroes. The nuances of the weapon system, the incredible level design, graphical presentation, the replayability, the well-designed bosses, it almost never ends. When I first heard about this game and how it was compared to Contra, I went into this experience with nothing more than the expectation that I was going to be shooting all the things and that was about it. While the story set up nothing to write home about, I was pleasantly surprised with this game. Like I've already said, the weapon mechanic really adds several layers to the gameplay experience, and you aren't really forced into any one specific playstyle. Everything works, and while some weapon combinations certainly work better than others depending on the situation, your progression is never stunted in a way where you can't progress. I actually noticed that when you die and continue, any power-up pods you shoot sometimes drop different weapons than the time before, which gives the player something different to use if whatever they had at the time just wasn't cutting it for them. If I ever failed, I never really blamed it on my current weapon system. I would just find myself thinking, given the tools that I have, how can I win this fight? Do I need to be more mobile? Do I need to stand in a specific spot? Will jump shots be more effective? Sometimes Gunstar Heroes is like a puzzle to solve, and any combination of the pieces you have available can get you through. At the end of the day, though, I think what stood out for me more than anything was how my experience with Gunstar Heroes was truly my own. I love that this game gives you the tools, and it's up to you on how you utilize them. And while this game can become incredibly difficult, the unlimited continue system certainly encourages you to come back and try again. The game doesn't want you to give up, and I feel like I was being silently cheered on the whole way. More than that, I was encouraged to play the game the way that I wanted. And when I finally completed the game and saw the end credits, I felt like what passed for a story in this game was my story. I wrote it how I wanted and took the actions that I felt best. The road was long, and the opposition was certainly relentless, but at the end of the day, this game made me feel like a Gunstar hero. And that will do it, my friends. This has been episode 54 of the Retro Wildlands, Gunstar Heroes for the Sega Genesis. Thank you very much for tuning into the show today. There really is a lot to this game, and I hope I did it justice by highlighting what I did. It's a shame how it seems like this game gets overlooked, especially if someone grew up not really getting into the Sega Genesis like myself. Whether you missed out on this game growing up or it was a major part of your childhood, I highly recommend tossing in Gunstar Heroes and giving it a run. During my research for this episode, I discovered that Gunstar Super Heroes, a sequel to this game, was released on the Game Boy Advance in 2005. You can bet your ass that this gem is officially on my radar. If you've played the sequel before and you have a minute, shoot me a message on our social media. I am genuinely curious about your thoughts and whether or not this one will be worth my time. If you like the show and you want to show it and myself some support, please consider subscribing to the Retro Wildlands on your preferred podcasting platform. I play new games for the show, write episodes, record, edit, and post them whenever I'm able, so I don't really have a dedicated release schedule like all the other cooler, more professional podcasts out there. Subscribing to the show will instantly inform you when I drop a new episode so you can get right back into the Wildlands with us. Now, if you really like the show and you have a moment to spare, I would appreciate it if you dropped us a good review. You can leave us a star rating on Spotify, or you can leave a written review over on iTunes, Podchaser, and Podbean, the platform I use to host the show out of. Good reviews will help the podcast appear in searches, which is awesome for spreading the word about us, but ultimately, I would just love to know that you enjoy what it is that I'm doing. This show is a fantastic hobby that's allowed me to create something really cool and network with some awesome people, so if you could let me know that I'm doing alright, I would appreciate it. But, as always, you are under no obligation to do so, my friends. Just having you listen to my show is much more than I could ask for, so above all else, I am thankful for you being here. So, what's coming up next? I really hate that I've only been churning out episodes this year, maybe one every 3 to 4 weeks, and I want to give you all something to listen to sooner. That said, I decided I want to go back and create another top 10 episode like I used to do. I originally started doing top 10s as a way to create something quick when I needed time to put an episode together for a beefier game. And honestly, I really like counting things down, so I thought it would be cool to try another one. But the question is, what would make a good topic? Well, after spending so much time with all the cool weapons in Gunstar Heroes, it got me thinking about other video game weapons. There are tons of unique weapons in video games, and when I started to think about it, there are certainly ones that I would consider favorites. So, next time on the Retro Wildlands, I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite video game weapons. It's going to be an awesome time, so I'm hoping you decide to join us as we take a look at some of the tools that we use to conquer our enemies and save the world. Until then, my friends, my name is Nomad, and you can find me roaming the Retro Wildlands.